You ever sit through a funeral thinking you knew the person in that casket, only to find out you didn't know them at all? At my grandmother's service, I expected quiet prayers, awkward family hugs, maybe a few tense looks over who would get what later. Instead, I got blindsided. Right after we buried her, the lawyer pulled out a folder, and within 5 minutes, my entire family was in shock. She hadn't left a dime to us. Every last cent went to an animal shelter. I grew up believing my grandmother was the glue that kept our family together. She wasn't rich, but she owned her house outright, had a decent amount in savings, and she always hinted at taking care of us after she was gone. It wasn't something she said once. It was practically a family motto. Every holiday, every birthday, she'd remind us, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you're all looked after." For me, that meant security. I didn't grow up with much. My parents worked hard but barely scraped by. So whenever bills piled up, Grandma would slide an envelope across the table with a quiet, "Don't tell anyone." She did the same for my cousins when their cars broke down or when tuition payments were late. That's why, in our minds, her inheritance was always this unspoken safety net. We didn't talk about it openly, but it hovered in the background like a guarantee. Family dinners at her place were like rituals. The same lace tablecloth, the same chipped china she refused to replace because things with history don't need fixing. And under all the warmth and routine, there was an undercurrent. Who got closer to Grandma? Who spent more time with her? Who she liked more? My aunt was always fussing over her health. My uncle handled her yard work. And I was the one who just sat with her. Not for favors, not for money. Just sat and listened. I thought that counted for something. There were small cracks, though, things I brushed off at the time. Once, I found a brochure for the local animal shelter tucked into her Bible. Another time, I overheard her talking to one of her church friends about how animals never betray you the way people do. It stung, but I assumed she was just venting about family drama. Everyone vents. I didn't know those cracks were warning signs. By the time she passed, I was numb. Grief mixed with exhaustion, and I wasn't prepared for the circus that a funeral turns into when money's on the line. The service itself was quiet, respectful, but you could feel the tension under every whispered condolence. My cousins avoided eye contact, my aunt kept checking her watch, and my mom, she just stared at the casket like she was waiting for Grandma to sit up and tell us all to behave. I went into that day thinking it would be hard but manageable. We'd cry, we'd share some stories, we'd maybe argue later over who gets the dining set. Normal family stuff. What I didn't expect was that 5 minutes after we lowered her into the ground, everything I thought I knew about her, and about us, would collapse. I had no idea what was coming. The cemetery dust hadn't even settled before the lawyer stepped forward. He was this tall, wiry man in a gray suit that looked a decade out of style, holding a leather folder like it weighed more than the coffin we just lowered. I thought he was going to wait until the reception, or at least until people had left. But no, he cleared his throat right there by the graveside. "I have instructions from Mrs. Langley," he said, his voice clipped, like this was just another Tuesday for him. Half the family leaned in, half pretended not to care but couldn't look away. My aunt crossed her arms, my uncle adjusted his tie, and my mother tightened her grip on the tissue balled up in her fist. I remember thinking, why now? Why here? It felt wrong. But then again, funerals have a way of bringing out the ugliest parts of people. He opened the folder. As per the will and testament, the estate, consisting of the house, savings, and personal assets, has been directed in full to the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. At first, I thought I misheard him. I actually looked around to see if anyone else caught that. My cousin's mouth dropped open. My aunt blinked, waiting for the rest. But the lawyer didn't pause. He didn't soften it. He just kept going like he was reading the ingredients off a cereal box. Effective immediately, all holdings are transferred to the shelter under the trusteeship of, he named a woman none of us had ever heard of. This includes the residence at 14 Brookside Lane and all financial accounts associated with Mrs. Langley. Silence. Not respectful silence. The kind that hums with disbelief. You could practically hear the gears grinding in everyone's heads. My uncle was the first to crack. "Excuse me? That can't be right." She told me. His voice broke, and he stopped, but we all knew what he meant. She told us we'd be taken care of. The lawyer didn't flinch. "This is the signed, notarized document, executed last year. Everything is in order." A year ago, my chest tightened. That was around the time she'd stopped letting me pick up her groceries, saying she had it handled. Around the time she'd started spending more afternoons at the park, sitting on benches with that old notebook of hers. My aunt's face turned red. She wouldn't do that. She loved this family. She said it over and over. The lawyer just repeated, "This is her will." I couldn't breathe. I wasn't angry yet, not exactly. It was more like the floor had been yanked out from under me. I'd built my future on the unspoken promise that what she left behind would give me a little breathing room. Maybe pay off my debts, maybe even start over somewhere. And now? Gone. All of it. To strangers. To dogs and cats in cages. That thought made me sick, and then guilty for even thinking it. Grandma loved animals. Everyone knew that. But all of it. Every last cent. As I looked around, I realized something unsettling. Not everyone was shocked. My cousin Rebecca, standing just behind the group, had her arms folded and this strange, tight-lipped look on her face. Not grief. Not anger. Something closer to resignation. And that's when it hit me. At least one person here already knew. After the graveside announcement, the family broke apart like glass hitting the floor. Some stormed off toward the cars. Others clustered in tight circles, whispering like it was high school gossip instead of our grandmother's funeral. The priest stood awkwardly nearby, clearly wishing he hadn't agreed to stay for the reading. I just stood there, stunned, until my mom tugged at my arm. "Come on, let's get to the house. We'll talk there." The house. Grandma's house. Except now it wasn't ours. That thought gnawed at me as we drove in silence. The windshield wipers dragging across a drizzle that had started as if the weather itself had picked up on the shift in the air. At the house, the familiar smell of lavender polish and old books was almost unbearable. It felt like trespassing, even though the lawyer had said nothing about us needing to leave immediately. We gathered in the living room, the same room where Grandma had told stories, handed out envelopes, laughed over family jokes. Now it was a war room. My uncle slammed his hand against the armrest. "This has to be contested. There's no way she'd do this of her own free will." My aunt jumped in. She was old. Maybe someone pressured her. That shelter must have manipulated her somehow. I stayed quiet. The words "a year ago" kept echoing in my head. A year ago, she was sharp. A year ago, she was stubborn enough to tell doctors where to shove their advice. A year ago, she still remembered birthdays better than any of us. That's when Rebecca spoke up. Calm. Too calm. She knew exactly what she was doing. Grandma wanted it this way. Every head snapped toward her. "And how would you know that?" my mother demanded. Rebecca shrugged. "Because she told me. I went with her to the shelter more than once. She said they were the only ones who appreciated her. That they didn't judge her. That animals gave her more comfort than her own family." Her words cut deeper than I expected. Judged? By us. I wanted to protest, to say we'd always loved her, always cared. But the truth stung. I remembered the arguments over holidays, the way people only showed up when they needed something, the subtle digs at her being old-fashioned. Still, it didn't sit right. Why would Grandma confide in Rebecca and not the rest of us? Why keep it secret? The room erupted. My uncle accused Rebecca of hiding things, my aunt accused the shelter of scheming, and my mom broke down crying, muttering about betrayal. I slipped away, down the hall to Grandma's bedroom. The door creaked the same way it always had, and the smell of her rosewater lotion hit me instantly. The dresser was still neat, the quilt folded just so. For a second, I almost expected her to walk in behind me. That's when I noticed the drawer. Not the top one where she kept scarves, not the bottom where she stored Christmas cards, but the middle drawer, the one that was always locked. Except now it wasn't. I pulled it open slowly, half expecting to find jewelry or some hidden stash of cash. Instead, there were papers, folders, letters, stacks of envelopes with the logo of the Willow Creek Animal Shelter stamped in the corner. My pulse quickened. Inside were donation receipts, notes scribbled in her handwriting, and even photographs. Grandma smiling next to cages of dogs, holding a kitten, standing beside people I'd never met. It wasn't some impulsive decision. She had been planning this for years. And tucked at the bottom, under the papers, was something that made my stomach drop even further. A sealed envelope with my name written across it. I sat on the edge of her bed with the envelope in my hands, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely tear it open. Grandma's handwriting stared back at me in those looping, deliberate strokes. She always wrote like every letter mattered, like words weren't just communication but a kind of legacy. For a second, I couldn't do it. I just sat there, staring, wondering if opening it would change everything, or if it would just confirm what I already feared. Then I slid my thumb under the flap and ripped it open. The letter inside was short. Too short. My dear, if you're reading this, then you know by now that I left everything to the shelter. Please understand, this wasn't against you. It was for me. The animals gave me peace when people didn't. They were there in the silence, when family only came with noise and needs. I hope one day you'll forgive me, but I couldn't carry the weight of everyone's expectations anymore. This was my choice. Grandma. I read it once, twice, 3 times, as if the words might change with repetition. But they didn't. Every sentence cut deeper. Not against me. For her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself that it wasn't personal, that it wasn't some indictment of how we treated her. But the truth bled through the ink. She didn't trust us. She didn't feel safe with us. And she'd made sure her final act left no room for negotiation. My chest burned. I folded the letter, unfolded it, folded it again, like somehow the creases could erase the words. I thought of all the nights I sat with her, listening to her stories about my grandfather, laughing at the way she'd yell at Jeopardy contestants through the TV. I thought those moments meant something. I thought I was different from the rest. But in the end, I was lumped in with everyone else. Just more noise. I shoved the letter back into the envelope, but the damage was done. My hands were clammy, my stomach twisted, and I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the living room, throw the envelope on the table, and shout, "See? She didn't believe in us. None of us mattered to her." But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I went through the rest of the drawer. There were more letters, some addressed to the shelter, thanking them for their work. Others were donation confirmations, thousands of dollars she'd already given away while she was alive. And then one particular document stopped me cold. It was a contract, a transfer agreement for the house, pre-signed, naming the shelter as future beneficiaries, dated and notarized, nearly 2 years ago. So it wasn't just a last-minute change. It wasn't dementia or manipulation or some bleeding heart impulse. This had been her plan for a long time. I sank back against the bed frame, clutching the papers, and I felt sick. Betrayal wasn't even the right word anymore. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about love, about who she valued. And it wasn't us. From the hallway, I could hear the shouting growing louder. Rebecca's voice rose above the others, firm and steady. She told me what she wanted. "You're all just in denial." Part of me wanted to believe she was lying, that Rebecca had somehow pushed her, convinced her, planted seeds. But the documents in my lap said otherwise. Grandma's words said otherwise. Still, something nagged at me. Why did Rebecca seem so prepared? Why did she already know the details, down to the exact timing of the will? Why was she the only one who hadn't looked surprised at the cemetery? My grip tightened on the envelope with my name on it. Maybe Grandma hadn't told me everything, but maybe Rebecca wasn't being fully honest either. And as the arguing in the living room reached a fever pitch, I realized I couldn't stay silent. Whether it was to protect Grandma's memory or expose my cousin's secrets, I had to step into the fire. I stood, stuffed the envelope in my pocket, and walked down the hall. The moment I entered the room, all eyes turned toward me. My uncle mid-shout, my mother tear-streaked, my aunt shaking her head, and Rebecca with that same unreadable expression. I cleared my throat. I found something. The room went silent when I spoke. For the first time all day, no one was shouting, no one was arguing. They were waiting for me to drop a grenade in the middle of what was left of our family. I held up the envelope. She left me a letter, in her handwriting, explaining why she gave everything to the shelter. My mother looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. And what did she say? I hesitated. Reading it out loud felt like betraying Grandma's final words, but keeping it to myself felt dishonest. So I told them. The short, cold lines about how animals gave her peace, how people didn't. How she didn't want to carry our expectations anymore. When I finished, the room erupted again. My aunt started crying. My uncle cursed under his breath, pacing like a man ready to punch through a wall. My mother looked like someone had just stabbed her in the chest. And Rebecca, she didn't flinch. She just nodded, as if I'd confirmed everything she'd already known. "See," she said quietly. "She told me this months ago. She was tired of all the drama, the fighting, the constant pressure." "Pressure," my uncle snapped. "She offered help. We never forced her." Rebecca shot him a look. You really believe that? You think showing up every time you were broke or every time your car broke down wasn't pressure? She felt used. She told me. The word used hung in the air like a curse. I wanted to defend us, to say we loved her, that we cared, that it wasn't just about the money. But the truth was gnawing at me. How many times had I sat at this very table, hoping she'd slip me some cash? How many times had we all leaned on her like a bank, not a grandmother? Before anyone could answer, I laid the other papers on the table, the donation receipts, the shelter contracts, the notarized transfer agreements. My aunt picked them up with shaking hands, flipping through them like they were evidence in a trial. And then something strange happened. A smaller sheet slipped out from the pile, one I hadn't noticed in the drawer. It wasn't a receipt. It was a handwritten note, Grandma's handwriting again. Only this time, it wasn't addressed to the shelter. It was addressed to Rebecca. Rebecca lunged for it, but my uncle snatched it up first. His eyes darted across the lines, and then his face hardened. You knew. He spat, shaking the paper at her. You didn't just know, she left you instructions. Everyone froze. He read aloud. Rebecca, you understand why I made this choice. You've been my confidant. If the others can't accept it, let them be angry with me, not you. Protect my decision. Don't let them tear it apart. The room went dead quiet. Rebecca's calm facade cracked, just for a second. Her lips tightened, her eyes flickered. Then she straightened. She trusted me. I promised her I'd protect her wishes. And I will. Something broke inside me at that moment. It wasn't just that Grandma had given everything away. It was that she had chosen someone among us to carry her secret, to guard it, to keep the rest of us in the dark. And it wasn't me. It wasn't any of us. It was Rebecca. And the worst part? She had done exactly what Grandma asked. But why did it feel like there was still more to the story? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the old pull-out couch in the den, staring at the cracked ceiling where the water stains formed shapes that wouldn't stop shifting. Every creak of the house felt like Grandma's ghost reminding me I'd failed her. Or maybe she'd failed me. I couldn't decide which hurt more. Rebecca's words kept replaying. She felt used. My uncle's outburst, you knew. And that letter with my name, which was supposed to comfort me, only carved the wound deeper. I thought about all the times I leaned on her. Was I guilty too? Had I treated her like an ATM with a smile attached? The shame twisted in my gut. But then anger flared. No, love wasn't one-sided. She let us believe we mattered, kept whispering promises about the future, and then yanked the rug out from under us in her final act. That wasn't fair. The house was silent, but my head was loud. Do I honor her wishes and let Rebecca guard them like some chosen gatekeeper? Or do I fight, drag this through court, expose whatever loophole, whatever manipulation might be hidden in those papers? I imagined both paths. One ended with us broke and bitter, watching strangers move into Grandma's house while the shelter cashed the checks. The other ended with a legal war, headlines maybe, the family shredded beyond repair. Neither looked good. But as the hours ticked by and the night pressed heavier, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let Rebecca dictate this. I wasn't going to let Grandma's final judgment define me as unworthy. If justice meant contesting her will, then so be it. My heart pounded with the weight of the choice. I didn't know if it was about money anymore. It felt bigger. It felt like reclaiming the right to be seen. I closed my eyes, whispering the words to myself like a vow. I know what I have to do. The next morning, I woke up with my decision solidified like cement in my chest. The house was already buzzing. My aunt on the phone with someone, my uncle pacing, Rebecca calmly sipping coffee like she hadn't just detonated our family the night before. I grabbed my jacket and headed straight for the lawyer's office. If there was going to be a fight, I needed to know the battleground. The building was a squat, brick rectangle that smelled like mothballs and stale coffee the moment I stepped inside. The receptionist gave me a wary glance, like she'd already dealt with half my family before me. She ushered me into a cramped office where the same gray-suited lawyer from the graveside sat behind a desk piled with files. He didn't even look surprised. You want to contest the will? Yes, I said flatly. Something about this doesn't add up. He adjusted his glasses. I can tell you now, Mrs. Langley's will is airtight. Signed, notarized, witnessed. She was in sound mind. There's very little ground to challenge. I leaned forward. But why cut us all out? Why keep it a secret? Why choose my cousin as her confidant and not anyone else? The lawyer tapped his pen against the desk, the rhythm maddeningly calm. Motives don't make a will invalid. Unless you can prove undue influence or fraud, the court will uphold her wishes. The words hit me like a slap. I thought I'd find an open door, some technicality. Instead, I found a wall. Still, I pressed. What about the letter she left me? Doesn't that matter? He shook his head. Sentiments are not law. Only the document stands. I left the office with my fists clenched and my head spinning. On the sidewalk, the drizzle from yesterday had turned into a full downpour, soaking through my clothes before I even made it to the car. It felt fitting, like the universe itself was mocking me. Back at the house, my family was waiting. My uncle jumped up the moment I walked in. Well, what did he say? He said it solid, I muttered. She covered every base. If we fight, we'll probably lose. The room deflated. My aunt sank into a chair, my mother covered her face with her hands, and Rebecca, she actually smiled. Just the faintest, smug little curl of her lips. That did it. My anger boiled over. You knew this was foolproof, didn't you? That's why you never looked shocked. That's why you've been sitting there so damn calm. Rebecca met my eyes, unflinching. I told you. Grandma trusted me. She wanted me to make sure her wishes were carried out. I'm just doing what she asked. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. For a moment, it felt like maybe this was the end, that we'd just collapse into acceptance, defeated. But deep down, I knew better. Something about Rebecca's confidence didn't feel like loyalty. It felt like ownership, like she had more power in this than she was admitting. And if she did, then the fight wasn't over. I thought it was. I couldn't have been more wrong. For the first time since the funeral, the house was quiet. No yelling, no slammed doors, no accusations bouncing off the walls. My aunt busied herself in the kitchen, clattering pans like noise could fill the void. My uncle sat in the recliner, staring at the muted TV, his eyes glassy. My mom drifted from room to room like a ghost, touching trinkets on the shelves as if they might whisper answers. And Rebecca, she kept to herself, calm, composed, scrolling on her phone like the storm had passed, and she was already moving on. I almost convinced myself it was over. Maybe the lawyer was right. Maybe Grandma had chosen what she wanted, and fighting it would only drag us through mud we couldn't win in. For a fleeting moment, I imagined the tension dissolving, us going our separate ways, bitter but resigned, letting the shelter take the house and the money. That night, I even slept a little. My dreams were restless, filled with barking dogs and the smell of rosewater lotion, but at least I slept. The next morning, the air in the house felt lighter, almost normal. My aunt served breakfast, my uncle cracked a weak joke about the coffee tasting like motor oil, and even my mom managed to smile. For a fragile hour, it felt like maybe we'd reached acceptance. But peace built on silence never lasts. Just as I let myself believe we could move forward, Rebecca stepped into the room with a folder under her arm. She placed it on the table with a sharp little thud that sliced through the calm. I think it's time you all saw the rest, she said. The room froze. My stomach dropped. Whatever was in that folder, it was going to shatter what little peace we had left. The calm didn't last long. Rebecca didn't rush. She let the silence stretch, let every second build pressure until the air felt too heavy to breathe. Then she flipped the folder open and slid a stack of documents across the table. My uncle snatched the top page like he was ripping off a bandage. His eyes darted over the words, and his face drained of color. No, this can't be real. I reached for the paper. It was a legal agreement, notarized and stamped, between the Willow Creek Animal Shelter and my cousin Rebecca. My voice cracked. What is this? Rebecca folded her arms. Grandma didn't just leave the estate to the shelter. She appointed me as co-trustee. I've been helping manage her donations for nearly 2 years. The words hit harder than any scream could have. You've been working with them? Behind our backs? My aunt sputtered, half rising from her chair. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She trusted me. She didn't trust the rest of you. She said you'd fight, argue, drag her memory through the dirt. She wanted someone to keep things clean, someone she could count on. It felt like the room tilted. Memories collided in my head. The times Grandma canceled our visits, the way she brushed off help, the strange comments about people only coming with noise. All that time, she wasn't just growing distant. She was moving closer to Rebecca. My mother's voice cracked, raw and broken. You sat here and let us believe. Let me believe. She wanted us taken care of. All the while, you were already in control. Rebecca didn't answer, and that silence screamed louder than words. I grabbed another document from the pile. It was a transfer of funds, tens of thousands, already moved from Grandma's accounts to the shelter under Rebecca's authorization. Dates stretched back months. This wasn't a plan for the future. It had already been happening while Grandma was alive. My pulse thundered in my ears. So you weren't just protecting her wishes. You were running them. You let us all keep hoping while you cashed out piece by piece. Rebecca's calm cracked for the first time. Her eyes flashed. Don't twist it. I didn't take a dime for myself. Everything went where she wanted it to. I honored her. My uncle slammed his fist on the table. You honored yourself. You got power. Control. That's what you wanted. The shouting rose again, louder than ever, but beneath it all, I caught something else. A detail that made my stomach churn. On the bottom of one of the transfers was a signature, not just Rebecca's, but someone else's. I leaned closer. It wasn't Grandma's. Who signed this? I demanded, holding it up. Rebecca froze, just for a second too long. It's a witness. But her voice wavered. I shoved the paper across the table. No, this isn't some random witness. This is someone involved. Who else knew? Who else was part of this? The silence that followed was suffocating. My aunt whispered, God, how deep does this go? Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. It doesn't matter. Grandma made her choice. I carried it out. That's all anyone needs to know. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The signature, the secrecy, the quiet way Rebecca had let us all spiral while she held the truth like a loaded weapon. It wasn't just Grandma's decision anymore. There were more players. People outside our family. People who had been moving pieces while we were left blind. And if that was true, then everything we thought we knew about Grandma's will was just the surface. That night, the house felt like a tomb. No one spoke after Rebecca's reveal. My uncle slammed out the front door, muttering about lawyers. My aunt shut herself in the guest room. My mother cried quietly at the kitchen table until she fell asleep with her head on her arms. And me? I sat alone in Grandma's bedroom, the documents spread out across the quilt she'd made years ago, the one with patches from old dresses and curtains. Every page felt like another betrayal. Transfers, contracts, receipts. Each one proof that we weren't just left out. We were deliberately excluded. And Rebecca wasn't just a messenger. She was the executor, the gatekeeper, the chosen one. I kept hearing Grandma's words from her letter. This wasn't against you. It was for me. But how could it not be against us? Against me? We were her blood. We were supposed to be her family, her legacy. Instead, she'd left everything to strangers and animals, and handed the keys to the one cousin who now looked at us with smug authority. The shame burned just as hot as the anger. I thought back to all the times I'd leaned on her. The rides to school when Mom couldn't. The money she slipped into my palm when rent was late. The encouragement when I felt like a failure. Was I really different from the others? Or was I just another burden she grew tired of carrying? The thought hollowed me out. At some point, I realized my hands were shaking. I shoved the papers aside and pressed my palms against my face, trying to hold myself together. But the more I tried, the more the cracks widened. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe Grandma saw us for what we really were, selfish, entitled, waiting for her to die so we could pick at her bones like vultures. The realization made me sick. For the first time since the funeral, I broke down. Not angry tears, not frustrated tears, grief. Raw, ugly, heaving grief. Not just for losing her, but for losing the image I'd always had of her. The idea that she believed in us. Believed in me. I sat there in the dark, the house creaking around me, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe we deserved nothing. Maybe fighting would just prove her right. But then my eyes drifted to the one paper I hadn't touched since earlier. The transfer slip with the unfamiliar signature. Not hers. Not Rebecca's. Someone else. That detail gnawed at me. If Grandma truly wanted this clean, why involve anyone else? Why bring in someone whose name we didn't even recognize? The grief curdled into something sharper. Maybe we weren't just cut out. Maybe someone had helped cut us out. My pulse steadied. My tears dried. For the first time in days, clarity slipped in. If there was even a chance that Grandma hadn't acted entirely on her own, then I couldn't just roll over and accept this. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I didn't wait for the family to stir. I gathered every document into a single folder, the receipts, the transfer slips, the notes, and drove straight back to the lawyer's office. The unfamiliar signature haunted me all night. I needed answers. The lawyer looked weary when I stepped in, like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Back again, he sighed. I dropped the folder on his desk. Tell me who this is. I jabbed a finger at the line with the strange signature. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the paper, and frowned. That isn't standard. This isn't one of my staff. Then who signed it? My voice was shaking, but not from fear. From fury. He hesitated, then flipped through another file on his desk. Finally, he exhaled. It looks like one of the board members of the shelter. They occasionally acted as witness on Mrs. Langley's documents. I felt the floor tilt. So you're telling me the people who benefited from this will were the same ones witnessing the signatures? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. By the time I left his office, my anger was a live wire. It wasn't just about Grandma's choice anymore. It was about influence, about people outside the family steering her. Whether Rebecca knew or not, she wasn't just protecting Grandma's wishes. She was helping someone else's agenda. That night, I called a family meeting. Nobody wanted to come, but curiosity or desperation got them into the living room. Rebecca showed up last, folder in hand, eyes sharp like she already knew this was coming. I held up the document. The witness on these transfers? It wasn't some random notary. It was a board member of the shelter. The same people who got everything. A murmur rippled through the room. My aunt gasped. My uncle swore. My mother whispered, "Oh God." Rebecca's face hardened. It doesn't matter. Grandma made her decision. You're just looking for excuses to fight what's already done. No, I said, stepping closer. This matters. Because if there's proof they influenced her, even subtly, then the will can be challenged. And you knew. You had to. Her lips tightened. I didn't know. But her voice wavered, just enough. I slammed the papers on the coffee table. Then why did she write you letters telling you to protect her wishes? Why did she put you in charge, if not because she knew the rest of us would smell something rotten? The room erupted. My uncle accused Rebecca of collusion. My aunt demanded to know how deep she was involved. My mother just sobbed, whispering that she couldn't believe her own mother had been manipulated. Rebecca stood, shaking now. I did what she asked. Maybe the shelter helped guide her. Maybe they didn't. But she trusted me. I wasn't going to betray that. I met her eyes, my voice low and steady. And what about betraying us? Silence. That was the breaking point. The illusion shattered. My uncle called his lawyer that night. My aunt started gathering records. Even my mom, through her tears, agreed. We weren't just going to let this pass. Rebecca didn't argue anymore. She just walked out, her shoulders rigid, leaving the folder behind like she'd finally lost control of the narrative. I picked it up. Inside were more documents, letters, receipts, even emails, tying the shelter's board closer to Grandma's finances than any of us had realized. The final piece. I looked around the room, at my fractured, exhausted family. For once, we weren't fighting each other. We were united against something bigger. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Grandma's words still hurt. They always would. But now I knew this wasn't just her voice echoing from the grave. Others had shaped it, twisted it, claimed it as their own. And if it took years, if it took every ounce of fight I had left, I was going to set the record straight. For her. For us. For me.